Hello, everyone. I'm checking that everyone is hearing me well. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to this webinar on market intelligence for impact-aligned breeding, current use, and barriers to impact. We are very happy to have this opportunity to present very important results for a piece of research that has been done under the Market Intelligence Initiative of the CGIAR. And we are honored to have a very well-aligned group of speakers that will speak to the results of this study. And we will be hearing from them soon. The webinar will present findings from recent qualitative and quantitative research on the current use of market intelligence, barriers that members of the CGIAR and NARES breeding teams face in systematically using market intelligence, and the extent to which breeding programs are aligned with impact objectives. This will lead into a discussion with participants on the types of interventions needed to change incentives or institutions for crop improvement to facilitate more impact-aligned decision-making in breeding programs. We are going to hear first from Berber Kramer and Colin Traxman. Berber is a senior research fellow at IFPRI's Markets, Trade and Institutions Unit, based in Nairobi in Kenya, and her research focuses mostly on technology adoption, financial inclusion, gender, and adaptation to climate change. Berber leads also the behavioral intelligence work and the impact assessment component of the CGIAR research initiative on market intelligence. Colin Trackman is an associate research fellow in the Markets, Trade and Institutions Unit at IFPRI, and her research focuses on topics such as social protection program targeting, agricultural value chains, and technology adoption. And she has played a key role in the Market Intelligence Initiative impact assessment work. She holds a PhD in agricultural resource economics from USC Berkeley. And Dina Najjar will also present results from the qualitative work. Dina is a researcher at ICARDA. She joined ICARDA in 2014 as a social and gender specialist. She's a socio-cultural anthropologist by training, and she focuses on the link between gender equality and policies, agricultural technologies and delivery systems, rural employment and migration, adaptation to climate change, and productive assets, including access to land and ownership in both in Middle East and North Africa. We will hear these presentations, and then we will have room for Q&As, and then we will have a very well group of panelists that I will introduce once the time comes. For now, we are very happy to begin with the seminar, and we have a little Menti for you, for those of you who are here and to respond to begin with. Laila, back to you. So here's the first question. What is the primary discipline? Is there a code to access this, Laila?
Apologies, let's find that. Sorry, I was supposed to be on the slide.
Okay.
So we've added the code to the chat. If everybody can go to menti.com and try the code 2662-7267. And then we'd love to have an idea of whoever, what the disciplines are of the people that are here as our first question here. So please go to menti.com. And then there you can enter the code that we just have pasted. Normally there's a QR code, but for technical reasons, it's not popping up.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And it's showing the second question, Laila, not the first one, not the primary discipline.
Huh?
In our slides, it's showing what's your primary discipline.
Okay.
So maybe we didn't just hop in with the second question, although the question is, if it will be showing. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so we just go to the second question straight away.
Yeah, sorry about that. A little technical
Yeah.
issue. But this one's just a prediction for some results that you're going to see later today. We did a survey with breeding professionals that we'll talk a little bit. And so the question is, we had participants from various different types of institutions. And which factors do you think that CGIAR participants most commonly say have an influence on them getting promoted to a higher position? So just you can drag and rank them and then submit, and we'll see what people think. And then you can see later in the talk if what you thought was right.
Okay, great. So responses are coming in. We see a lot of people entering first developing varieties with positive social impact, followed by a number of varieties released, number of publications, and then last one, providing leadership and taking initiative. We see, it seems like most people have now entered their answers. So remember this is what the audience thinks before the webinar on how promotion factors are being ranked. Let's see later on in the webinar what the actual ranking is. Back over to you, Guy.
Can you hear me now? Thank you, everyone. So we will hear from our first presenters, Berber Kramer and Carly Trotzman. They will present results of the survey evidence on CGIAR, NARES, and SME breeding programs, scaling market intelligence use in genetic innovation. Floor is yours, Berber and Carly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Guy. And we appreciate everyone here today, and we're excited to share these results with you. So this is some work that's part of the market intelligence initiative, as we mentioned, which is part of the CGIAR. So just to give you a little bit of introduction on this work, many of you that are involved in breeding programs may know that millions of dollars are invested in plant breeding efforts for the Global South every year. As an example here, in 2018, the CGIAR spent upwards of $800 million on R&D. And so we want to make sure that these investments are well targeted. And the way that these investments have been sort of targeted and breeding efforts have been steered in the past has really changed over time. Of course, in the 1960s, which was kind of the Green Revolution era, famously, there was really just a focus on maximizing genetic gains, right? Really getting yields up in farmers' fields above all else. But of course, as time has gone on and, there have been more and more efforts in breeding programs for the Global South, this has really changed. As early as the 80s, we started to see, the idea that farmers should be involved in the varieties that they would like. And this sort of led to different participatory methods. In more recent years, in the 2000s, it became sort of more of a focus towards demand-led breeding, of thinking not just what do farmers want, but what do other actors want in the market as well. And then, now these days, the problem has gotten perhaps even more complex, in that we're not just trying to think about what farmers and other actors want, but also what attributes and what varieties will help to get at impact. And this can be impact in many different areas. It can be, impact in poverty reduction, which, might be linked to higher yields, but also climate impact and, potential impacts on nutrition or gender equity, for example. And trying to, breed for these different types of impacts, as well as trying to, keep in mind maximizing genetic gains and, really breeding to what farmers and other market actors need, is a really complex problem, right? So it becomes a question, of how are breeding programs trying to do this? And a key challenge is that decision-making processes in a lot of breeding programs are often very ad hoc. And so the idea is, we're trying to maximize for all of these objectives, but is it being done in any sort of formal, systematic way? And the market intelligence initiative that I mentioned is really pushing for more systematic processes, right? So thinking about practices that can be used over and over again in the same way. Things like market segmentation, where you're really defining the market that you're breeding for, target product profiling, which is, understanding the product needs of that market segment, and then pipeline investment cases to develop out these potential investment cases for these products. And these, coming out of transdisciplinary teams that don't just involve breeding breeders, but also other experts that might have relevant information. And so we've also in the initiative been developing resources to help teams do this. For example, GLOMIP, the Global Market Intelligence Platform, which aggregates some information that there've been other webinars on. So in this project, we were trying to understand a bit more what drives this more systematic behavior. So first we were asking to what extent are breeding programs currently systematically using market intelligence to inform their breeding investment decisions. And then, if not, or if only to some extent, then what are the barriers to further adoption of these practices? And in order to do this, we carried out a survey of 520 breeding professionals. What do we mean by breeding professionals? This could be breeders, natural or social scientists who inform breeding decisions. Many of you who are in the webinar may have participated in this survey, so I'm sure you'll be excited to see the results. But as a brief preview, these are not just breeders of any one crop or in any one country, and they're not just from any one type of organization either. We have breeders from within the CGIAR, but also our national partners, the private sector, and other sort of international organizations or academic institutions. Because this is a bit of a, sorry, I don't know what's happening with the slides. Because this is a bit of a challenging issue to capture all of these experts, basically, what we did was just a respondent-driven sampling. So we promoted our survey at conferences. We got referrals from various colleagues in the CGIAR. And then we also incentivized participants to share the survey within their network and to get more respondents that way. The survey was implemented online, and it took around 30 to 40 minutes for participants to complete on average. So just to give you a bit of a glance at the sample, so we had a fairly varied sample. Around 2/3 of participants are plant breeders, but we also had a lot of natural scientists, and to a lesser extent, also social scientists and some other types of experts. Our sample is mostly male, but about a quarter female. These are professionals, so almost half have a PhD and almost all of the rest have a master's. Many have been working in breeding programs for a long time, on average around 10 years, and many are in leadership roles. They come from all kinds of institutions, so about 42% from national research institutions, 20%-ish from CG, 15% from private sector, and 24% for the rest. And as you can also see, they work on a variety of crops, so rice, maize, for example. So yeah, that's just a bit about the sample. So sorry, I don't know how we just went backwards. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit then about some of the results that we found in the survey. So first, we wanted to understand how formal the processes currently are for sharing market intelligence. So this is looking at the formality of the market intelligence use process in various types of organizations. So the top bar is the CGIAR. The middle bar is national extension government partners. And the last slide is the private sector. So basically, these are the results looking at how formal the process is. As you can see across organization types, around 40 to 45% of respondents indicate that there is indeed a systematic process for collecting and sharing market research. But the rest of the respondent, which is over half, basically say that there's some informality in the process. So either that there's some compilation, but the process mostly relies on insights of individuals involved in TPP development, or that the process relies mostly on the market research insights of individuals involved, and so there's no compilation at all. So this is sort of getting at the idea that decision-making processes are quite informal in many places and depend highly on who is in the room. And notably, we have this statistics at the bottom that only 63% of CG respondents, 56% of NARES respondents, and 65% of private sector respondents agreed with the statement that if they're unable to attend a target product profile development session, that their opinions will still be incorporated. And ideally, if these are experts and well-integrated teams, that would be 100%. So another aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is having transdisciplinary teams with expertise from various different realms. And so in this question, we were just asking about whether what types of experts that teams have. And so we asked whether there's a breeder on the team, whether there are various types of natural scientists on the team, and whether there are various types of social scientists on the team. And we see that while in most cases there is a plant breeder on the team, as well as some type of natural scientist, regardless of the organization type, that we often less so see social scientists on breeding teams, which is, a key source of insight is social science to understand, whether farmers will adopt and the like. And so we see that less than half of teams, or at least half of respondents' teams from CG and NARES have a social scientist, and even fewer from the private sector have this.
So we looked at several barriers with the survey. A first one being a question of, is the market intelligence available for breeding programs and for our respondents to use it? And here, an important finding was that one of the barriers to having market intelligence available was a lack of funding. Now, this is also not a surprise, given that the type of data that is being used in decision-making typically depends on large quantitative data collection efforts. So for instance, 64% of our respondents said that their programs greatly use large data sets, large quantitative data sets in TPP development. And only 46%, so fewer respondents, indicate using online resources like journal articles. Now, it's not that there is sort of a lack of funding for just market intelligence. Teams feel that they lack funding in general. On the flip side, though, there is optimism, with 68% of respondents believing that funding for breeding will increase over the next 5 years. So let's hope that that is indeed the case. Then the next question is, if the funding is available, do teams know how to, if the market intelligence is available, do teams know how to use this information? And here we found that there's barriers in terms of how to use market intelligence in decision-making, and especially around how to aggregate information from different sources. So for instance, we see that a lot of respondents indicate the information is not really actionable. In the CGIAR, especially, that it's unclear how to combine information from diverse sources. And then we also see a number of respondents indicating that it's unclear to weigh the needs of different stakeholders or different users. And a final group of respondents is indicating that the benefits are uncertain. But so we see a lot of challenges around how to now aggregate and use market intelligence in decision-making, which is calling for better tools to help systematically integrate information from different sources. A next barrier could be related to the willingness to use this type of information and to move towards transdisciplinary breeding, because it is quite a new concept, and we know that any change, can meet some resistance. Now, overall, we see when asking respondents whether they think that who should be on breeding teams. So we asked them, should breeders be on breeding teams? Should natural scientists, other natural scientists be on these teams? And social scientists, should they be on the teams? Of course, the vast majority indicates that breeders and also other natural scientists should be on breeding teams. Social scientists also indicate that they feel that social scientists should be on breeding teams. So we see that here on the right, where close to 90% of respondents indicate a social scientist should be on the breeding team, but that's just among social scientists. When we look at plant breeders and other scientists, less than 2/3 actually believes that there should be a social scientist on the team. So this is raising an interesting question. You know, to what extent there's really a perception that these teams should be transdisciplinary and should have people from multiple diverse backgrounds on the teams. In addition, we're seeing that social scientists feel that their technical background, not having a natural science background, that this limits their contribution to decision making. And we see that female social scientists, when looking at the types of decisions that our respondents are involved in, female social scientists are least involved in decisions across the breeding process. And so this is suggesting that there might be some blind spots and some limitations for a diverse set of disciplines to contribute to decision-making in the program. And that could have real implications in terms of what types of impact areas and what types of traits and stakeholders are being prioritized in breeding decision-making. For instance, on this next slide, we see that there's a heavy emphasis on production-related characteristics, the production environment, production system, in informing target product profiling. But we see much less emphasis being placed on more social impact-related outcomes, including gender diversity, perhaps because female social scientists are the ones who have least input in the decision-making process. So we see here gender differentiated preferences of producers and impact opportunity for gender equality are ranked lowest in terms of what information is currently being used as input into the target product profiling process. So then a next slide, a final slide with statistics here, findings from our survey, relates to incentives that respondents have within their breeding programs to work towards these impact goals and to, for instance, bring more gender equality within the different aspects of breeding decision-making. Now, what we see here is that actually institutions may not really reward breeding professionals for meeting impact goals. And although we see that intrinsically the respondents indicated that developing new varieties that have a high likelihood of being released, also developing varieties with a strong social impact, they are listing these as important motivators for them themselves, but they are actually, and especially in the CGIAR, not that likely to be incorporated for promotions. And for instance, the top factor here within the CGIAR we see being providing leadership and taking initiative, but adoption rates and developing varieties with positive social impact are rarely perceived as factors that could influence promotion. So that's important to keep in mind. And that's also kind of, I think, showing a disconnect between what we think is important, also based on your answers in the Mentimeter, versus what actually respondents in the survey indicated influences their promotions. So that's the final finding based on the survey before I move to conclusions and turn it back over to Guy. There we go. So our conclusions, just in summary, we see that there's some adoption of market intelligence-based processes, especially target product profile development, but it much depends on who is in the room, who is part of the breeding teams in terms of what information is being used, given that there's overall a lack of systemization of market intelligence. And also a lot of teams not having social scientists might still not be fully operating in a fully transdisciplinary way. So what then are some of the barriers to impact-aligned breeding? First of all, funding restricts the amount of information that is available. But we also see challenges in how to use this information, which is calling for better tools and better capacity on how to use this. And so, for instance, when thinking of a global market intelligence platform that the Market Intelligence Initiative has developed, it is important not only to translate macro indicators into actionable recommendations, but also to look at how to aggregate micro evidence, for instance, on consumers and producers' needs and preferences and barriers to adoption using these kinds of tools. Now, in addition, as we mentioned, many teams don't have social scientists, and with decision makers not believing that there should be social scientists on their teams, in 1/3 of the cases, for our respondents indicating that they don't feel a social scientist needs to be on the team, then that raises the question how to achieve impact. And maybe even more so important is to move towards an incentive structure that more supports impact-aligned breeding, given that right now promotion incentives do not reward breeding for impact as much as we would hope, especially within the CGIAR. So with that, we turn it over to Guy and Dina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carly and Berber. Very interesting presentations. I can see that my answer to the Menti question at the beginning was wrong, but so the results are very relevant to make us everyone understand what are the type of changes that we need to begin with. We move right into the second presentation by Dina on the results of the qualitative analysis of this topic. And remember that you have the Q&A section in which there are already very interesting questions. Thank you, Gary, for those questions. And they are being answered live by the team. Dina, over to you for the presentation now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Guy. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. My research, I'm going to be presenting about our research on transdisciplinary research approaches for crop science research, theory, practice, and implications for research design. I am here representing a broader team, including MIPI Work Package 5 colleagues. I would like to start by looking at the current challenges in agri-food systems and which apply very much to breeding. We all know that we have multiple challenges that we need our breeding programs to answer to, such as climate change, population growth, ecosystem degradation, rising demand for healthy and diverse diets, which impact all regions and transcend disciplines. Also addressing these challenges requires multidisciplinary research, but also practical knowledge in order to have solutions that work in a specific context to develop innovations in crop varieties, agronomy, markets, and policies. We also have a problem of a systematic exclusion of women and minority voices, which has been linked to governance issues. We also have a lack of inclusive research designs leading to limited diversity of perspectives. We see some perspectives dominating over others. We also have inconsistent, because we have all these diverse stakeholders, so we have inconsistency in problem definition. As Berber and Carly has pointed out, there are some recent advancements through CGIAR initiatives, like excellence in breeding, gender and breeding, and MIPI, of course. And the contribution of these initiatives is that it allowed us to broaden our perspective to include consumer preferences, to include millers and also other stakeholder needs into our breeding programs. However, there's still opportunities in which we can innovate further. That is needed, particularly with regards in deciding breeding objectives, incorporating stakeholder perspectives, organizing research teams, translating knowledge to action, and defining and measuring success. So transdisciplinary research promises to answer many of these problems because it is solution-oriented and it also works across disciplines. It's mainly the main difference between multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary is that it involves non-academic stakeholders like millers, like farmers in knowledge creation. It integrates academic, practical, and indigenous knowledge, and it's also flexible in methods, and it's ideal for addressing wicked problems which lie at the heart of interaction between human and also the environment. The principles of transdisciplinary research is that it's inclusive and interdisciplinary and it's collaborative. It incorporates system thinking and participatory methods. It also ensures scientific rigor and it is socially relevant. The advantages of transdisciplinary research are that it is data-driven, it improves outcome by better partnership between public and private institutions. It also accelerates adoption of new crop varieties and technologies in breeding. However, there are challenges to transdisciplinary research, which have already been identified, which include the way we are evaluated. These are institutional barriers and also difficulties in reaching consensus. There are many different stakeholders that might want conflicting things. There's many disciplines, so it's difficult to merge these diverse methods together. It is also resource intensive, and it is impacted by time constraints and how do we measure success. So success needs to be measured in gains from multiple traits related to climate change, drought. So it becomes really a challenge to integrate all of that. For our study, we did a qualitative study, similarly with the similar objectives to the quantitative study presented today. So we wanted to see how is market intelligence applied, how do teams collaborate, and how is their success assessed. We also wanted to see what opportunities and constraints and practical limitations impact the realization of the benefits that transdisciplinary research promises within the context of everyday challenges. Also, an additional question here is with regards to methodology. So what can we learn by applying a mixed methods approach to these questions? Can we triangulate? Do we find the same findings, or can we explain further some of these findings with our combined research approach? So we did a face-to-face qualitative interview. The members of Work Package 5 in Market Intelligence Initiative. We did the interviews in our centers, in our regions, with the private companies, with the NARES, as well as our own CG centers. And the interviews lasted between 45 minutes to 2 hours. We aimed at maximum diversity sampling with regards to gender, as well as leadership roles and type of institution. As I mentioned, we covered 27 nationalities and 22 countries and 29 organizations. We also plan to do another survey with social scientists, as it seems they are the weakest link in these teams. So for the findings, we've divided them into 5. The first one is the information sources for breeding. And here we looked at patterns in the data. So I will be coding the findings into orange and yellow. So orange are patterns that are common, and yellow are patterns that are not common. So breeding teams rely on various sources such as field data, farmers' feedback, market analysis, and scientific reports to inform their decisions. However, the use of farmer feedback data and market analysis appears to be inconsistent and lacking in vigor. So we've seen instances where breeders tell us that they do focus groups with multiple stakeholders, but there were no record or note taken or a specific approach to gather this feedback. We've also seen instances where institutions do not incorporate market intelligence into their breeding program. For example, in general, at least not adequately. In general, the Institute does not have a mechanism to understand the needs of users, such as consumers and millers, and to formulate research on this basis. This is what I describe as the gray area. This is a breeding program director from a NARES institution. This breeding program relies on information from a team of biometricians who provide predictive and explanatory information to help the program make decisions. The biometricians provide a range of information data on yield performance under diverse adverse conditions, how the lines perform on different locations, and the tolerance or resistance of these varieties to various diseases and pests. This is a crop lead from the CG. And this is not very common, but we did see a few crop leads in particular mentioning that. Although high yield is always a priority for breeders, consumer preferences also need to be taken into account. At present, this breeding program invites all stakeholders on board and is like a consortium of different actors or disciplines in the chain to develop a prototype that will be widely accepted. We also found that in some cases, farmer feedback, although the breeder thought it was participatory, but it was collected through a top-down approach, where the breeders pre-select the traits and then they ask farmers to rank them per plot, rather than allowing farmers to identify the traits they prefer based on factors such as gender, age, or land size. For trait prioritization, we found that breeders prioritize traits like climate resilience, nutritional value, and market appeal, but the emphasis tends to lean heavily towards climate and environmental factors, particularly the agronomic traits. Especially, we noted that when we asked them to prioritize a single most important market segment, especially when they do not have enough money, which as explained was often the reality. There's limited funding. I would just go for the market segment that covers the largest area. The majority of farmers are based in rain-fed areas where the key issues are drought and biotic stress. Breeder from DCG. This is a very tricky question you have framed. It is always like the line of work that you are doing. It will be your choice. So I will be comfortable doing that work that I am doing now with slight modifications. Again, the priorities in my segment is reducing pesticides. Breeder from DCG. With regards to gender inclusion, while some breeding programs have been actively seeking input from women farmers and marginalized groups, challenges remain in integrating these perspectives. For example, a breeder from the NARES told us that the barriers faced by our breeding program was the role of gender in rural areas. Women do not feel comfortable in sharing their ideas in focus groups. They also withhold information in front of high-level delegations, especially government officials. Another breeder from the private sector said, cultural barriers where women are not allowed to talk to visitors limit the flow of information from women farmers, suggesting the need for strategies to facilitate their participation. And we know these issues can be addressed with the help of social scientists. But we also see that there's a process taking hold, particularly in the CG, where gender issues are becoming increasingly more important. So for example, this breeder says that approximately 15 years ago, the Gender Focus Initiative was introduced here. Initially, it was a novel concept for me, and I wasn't fully aware of its implications. We implemented numerous initiatives to differentiate selection criteria by gender, incorporated gender aspects into training, and included gender indicators in project proposals. So we see that the participation, there is effort and there is awareness to include women into the trait preferences and trait prioritization criteria. However, we found that when we look at the studies that these perspectives are being underrepresented. So in particular, a scoping study, which was conducted by Halle Ann earlier this year, it shows that only a third of the trait prioritization study relied on sex disaggregated data. When we look at measuring success, we find that success with regards to interdisciplinary work is notably underrepresented, as most breeding teams have limited integration with other disciplines. And some have mentioned that they meet in product advancement meetings or they hold focus groups or meetings only once a year. And some also mention twice in a year where their interaction happens. So for example, when we said who is on your team, many, if not most, of the breeders and the crop leads did not mention anyone else but the breeding team. So for example, this crop lead from the CG said that our team is really big, comprising 8 scientists and 5 technicians, and he was referring to the breeders. And then also he mentioned breeding, also he or she mentioned also that there are PhD students. Very few did the crop leads talk about having a multidisciplinary team when we were asked about who is on your team. For example, this crop lead from the private sector said that in addition to product success, the presence of a multidisciplinary team in the breeding program is considered a success. So he was referring to his own team, he or she. Typically, success is measured by the number of varieties released, funding acquired, capacity building, and publications with breeders, often equating their achievements to the number of farmers adopting these varieties. For example, this answer was quite reiterated by many breeders. Once you go to the field and see the varieties planted and you will taste it from the farmer's field, that's where you could say your success is. Rarely did breeders mention that talk about the impact of these varieties in the 5 impact area or any of these impact areas. And I have this quote, which was not often reiterated, the theme was not often reiterated. Here, the crop lead mentioned success is defined in terms of developing a product that is acceptable to farmers, processors, end users, the organization itself, the board, and the regulatory authorities. A breeding program is considered successful when it meets all these criteria. So when we ask them about recommendations to improve the breeding program, we find that a lot of these recommendations align with best practices or principles of transdisciplinary research. So we think we get affirmation that this is a good approach to improve our breeding impact, the impact of our breeding programs. Many mentioned improving stakeholder engagement and communication. For example, a breeder mentioned the information that we have is not accurate. For example, farmers and mills do not tell you exactly what they want. There has to be sustained efforts on improving communication with partners. Government commitment in the form of national government support and policy for national extension is another important factor for success. That is why success varies from one country to another. And we've also heard from breeders that the way that they breed in market segments is not the same as the way the varieties are released, which is for the whole country. So again, this calls for policy reform in how the varieties are being registered. Many also mentioned the importance of integrating other disciplines. For example, incorporating surveys into our approach, especially those focused on farmers, could provide valuable insights into production costs and challenges. Another crop lead mentioned, however, there are constraints related to seed systems, which are outside the expertise of the teams. So a transdisciplinary approach can bring this expertise into the teams. So in conclusion, what are the recommendations for advancing transdisciplinary research in crop science? First of all is to engage stakeholders. We need to involve stakeholders in a systematic way, including non-academic participants for a holistic approach. Prioritize consistent and inclusive communication strategies to bridge knowledge gaps. So a 5 for a breeder might mean less work for a woman. So we need to bridge these different types of knowledge. Combine academic, practical, and indigenous knowledge for context-relevant solutions, solution-oriented, foster cross-disciplinary learning and co-production of knowledge. Also strengthen methodologies, develop frameworks that ensure consistency and clarity in the integration of market intelligence and feedback from varied sources. Emphasize participatory and flexible methods that align with transdisciplinary research principles. Also to address gender and inclusion gaps, implement targeted strategies to incorporate women and marginalized groups' perspectives in research and decision-making processes, also using an intersectional lens. We haven't gone in depth into this intersectional lens. We need to work more on that. Encourage environments that support open dialogue and mitigate cultural and institutional barriers. Also, we need to improve team coordination, utilize structured team coordination strategies to align objectives and methodologies across disciplines, foster mutual learning and continuous feedback loops to adapt practices effectively. Also, we need to prioritize comprehensive impact assessment for different aspects, consumer, poverty, gender equality, climate resilience, and so on. Conduct transdisciplinary impact assessments that go beyond academic metrics to include social, economic, and environmental factors. Implement reflexive practices to address conflicts and ensure adaptive responses. Also secure institutional support, for example, in the way the evaluation is happening. Advocate for institutional changes that promote TDR practices and address barriers like resource limitation and policy support. Build incentive structures that align with impact-focused breeding objectives. Thank you very much. These are the references. And this is my email if you require more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dina, for the very interesting presentation on the results of the qualitative analysis that point out to new things beyond what the first presentation was showing. We will move right away, and I remind people that there's still the Q&A. It's the hotline for questions, and they are being answered live by the team. So please use that because it's a very interesting discussion there. We will now move to the panelists. We have two very distinguished panelists today with us. First, one panelist is Hail Tufan. Most of you know her. Hail leads the Equitable Agricultural Research Lab at Cornell, University of Cornell. The lab brings together researchers with experience in plant breeding, agricultural economics, GIS, anthropology, gender studies, and science and technology studies to contribute to equitable crop improvement theory and practice. And she serves in leadership positions for several grant-funded projects, including priority setting co-lead of the Feed for the Future Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement. Hail is the 2019 recipient of the Norman Ball of Field Award. And we also have with us as a panelist, Maria Fernanda Alvarez. She's the Director of Crops for Nutrition and Health at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and she has over 20 years of expertise in plant breeding. She leads the program, the ABC program for rice, beans, cassava, and forages, prioritizing sustainable intensification and climate resilience, and she has a PhD in genetics in plant breeding. So we will move right away into questions to our panelists, and maybe I will start to Maria Fernanda. Can you hear us well, Maria Fernanda? And I want to ask you, first question, I think immediately, is to what extent do the findings of both the qualitative and quantitative research resonate with your own experience working in breeding programs? I think that's something that we have a lot of breeders here in the seminar, and we want to ask a breeder on whether you see yourself reflected in the results of the seminar. Over to you, Maria Fernanda.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. And thank you for the invitation, since I'm not even currently part of the market intelligence. But I think that some of these results are also due to the fact that we have a very diverse crops and types of breeding teams. So for some, it will be a need, and it will be very good to have a little bit of a disaggregation of that to understand much better which crops are more based or are more willing to base their decisions on that. But coming from the entire breeding teams, I guess that we are all happy to have a better support from social scientists to take decisions, because and we have a culture in which we acknowledge that it's important to have different inputs to take better decisions in terms of TPPs and others. But there are some areas, for example, like gender, that was highlighted, and we still are asking for a better support in that area, because gender gets very diverse when you go to the granularity of a community, of a region, or even within a country. It's very difficult to go through all of them. So I think that that's a really good and important space in which we're also needing a little bit more of support. And then according that, if we want to involve social scientists, I guess that also it's according to the size of the breeding programs. Look, because some will have the space to be able to take that amount of different types of social scientists, and others might not have the access. So I think that through market intelligence, that access should be more in equilibrium and very well distributed across breeding teams and regions and crops.
Thank you so much, Maria Fernanda. That's a very good insight. And maybe I have a question now to Hale. Hale, maybe the question to you, and it's a little bit of the discussion also in the chat, it's actually how can breeding programs promote and support well-functioned and transdisciplinary team, okay? How, from the side of the breeding programs, what can be done? And what can be done in terms of having the transdisciplinary teams collaborate with each other better for decision-making in terms of how the breeding programs will go. But over to you, Hey.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. It's nice to see everyone and be back in this loop. And market intelligence is a really exciting opportunity, because I think it's the first time we have this kind of consolidative investment for social science that informs breeding. And yet here we are, right? We're discussing survey results and interview results that show that breeding teams are still not operating in transdisciplinary way, and social scientists, especially women, are feeling limited in their involvement. So what's going on? I think the good news is we know the problem. It's power dynamics. And the bad news is that power dynamics is the problem, right? Because as old as interdisciplinary teams are, power dynamics kind of have followed that historically as well. So in our publication last year, I hope maybe some of our findings would help answer the why we're seeing these results from the interviews and the surveys. For example, we looked at power dynamics within interdisciplinary breeding teams, and we found that institutional incentive structures do not promote interdisciplinarity, right? So there's an institutional element there. Another thing we found that was hierarchies among and preconceived notions about other disciplines affected their ability to collaborate and integrate their knowledge together. We also found social scientists were perceived as being service providers rather than producing relevant and standalone science. And lastly, that disciplinary hierarchies were reflected in who gets to set the agenda, research questions, and budget allocation. So I think firstly, to build functional interdisciplinary teams, we need to address some of these more systematic and higher level questions. And I think personally, maybe starting to question some assumptions. For example, the assumption that it's enough to have a social scientist on the team needs to be thought about, because in our research, we found that breeders had very visible power in interdisciplinary teams. They set the agenda, research questions, budgets, and they invite in the social scientist. So it's like a guest being invited in by a host, right? And this really started them off on an unequal footing. So I think we need to rectify that a little bit in how we're structuring these teams. Second, the assumption that interdisciplinary research is like a relay race, that social scientists generate data, they hand it over, and breeders use that as they see fit, right? In our work, we found that social scientists felt really pressured, that they were delaying the outputs of breeders by not doing their research quick enough and in the way that breeders expected. So instead, I think transdisciplinarity means that you do research together, the questions are asked, the silos are broken apart, because that's the only way we can really move together, just like the research developed here with the mixed methods. How do you start with one question and have different ways of answering it? And third and last, I think we need to question some of the assumptions of our disciplines. What is valid data? Who determines what's valid, what's robust? Because too often we still see in these interdisciplinary teams that qualitative social sciences and gender research can be brushed off as anecdotal or just not practical. I think Michael's comment was on this. How do we actually use the data is still an issue, right? Because what does data mean? What is usable data is contested. So I think, kind of this focus on just give us numbers to work with has caused these cross-functional teams to have some internal, discrepancies. So the legitimacy of social science as a science is sometimes questioned, and that causes an inferiority complex. So I think to close, whether we like to admit it or not, we're social beings, we have behaviors, beliefs, practices, perceptions, and we bring all those to our work. And unless we kind of fundamentally question some of those, I think it will be difficult to have these functional teams work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ale, for your insights that also address some of the discussion in the Q&A. Please follow that discussion. Keep sending questions as well, and send questions to the team even afterwards, after we finish the seminar. I think it has prompted a very interesting set of challenges that we face in the future. Maybe last 30 seconds comments from Maria Fernanda and Hale on the seminar, on the way forward on this. Only 30 seconds, and then we close the seminar. Maria Fernanda and then Hale.
Okay, thank you. Very, very short. I think that this is a starting point. At least we have data, and I think that social scientists will agree that that's the main, the baseline to start taking different decisions and directions, and maybe take advantage of the new structure that we want to have in Bring for Tomorrow. So we can also join much better forces with the social scientists and understand what are the needs from each one of the teams and how we can communicate better to develop like a more impactful, not just TPPs, but also in general varieties that will achieve a higher impact.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda, and thank you for pointing out to this opportunity that we have in the near future with the new Breathing for Tomorrow program. Hale, 30 seconds, final comments.
Less than 30 seconds. I do think there is a need for more data science, especially around these interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary teams. How do we actually use and integrate and generate data together is something we haven't cracked. So I think more data science work around how do we use all our different streams of data is really important. Thank you.
Hale, thank you so much. And also, it's complementary to something that Maria Fernanda has said, that this is kind of a baseline, but it's because it's probably the first time we see a very large survey results from different angles. So we hope that we will build on the results of this. So without any other comment, please continue putting questions in the chat, and then continue sending your questions to the team. I would like to thank, first of all, the presenters, Berber, Kali, and Dina, for very excellent presentations and very, very interesting results, definitely. Thank you to Maria Fernanda and Hale for providing your comments and providing your insights into this. And thanks everyone to, I believe, near 100 participants in the seminar. We are very excited to have shared these first results of the large study. As I said, keep sending your questions to the authors and to the presenters. This has been fantastic. And thanks, everyone. We look forward to hear more about this topic in the future. Bye, everyone.